Hello and welcome to Career Expert Roundtable. I am Bill, the company's expert, and as always, I have with me Abby from Life Work Balance. And today our topic is the secret to career success, why transferable skills matter more than ever. So if you are a job seeker, you're going to interviews, you're writing resumes, you're figuring out your job search campaign, this is for you. Abby is a professional recruiter and has that background. So we're going to cover this today. I see there's 4 people here. Let's dive in. Take it away, Abby.
Yes. Hi. As Bill introduced me, I'm Abby, and I'm a career coach and specifically also an interview coach. And so while I do have some background in HR and recruiting, my bread and butter is helping people prepare for their interviews. So let's talk about how transferable skills can really help you in whatever phase of the job search or career world you might be in. It can help you. Transferable skills can help you switch industries. They can help you overcome career gaps. They can help you with your applications. It's something you want to bring up in interviews, etc. So a couple of the things that I had prepared for us to talk about during our stream today would be what are transferable skills? You may have heard about them, but you're not really quite sure what they are or how they apply to you. The role of transferable skills and specifically soft skills in today's job market. And I don't really like the phrase soft skills. I think life skills might be a better way to phrase it, but we can get into that discussion maybe a little bit later.
It's like the euphemism treadmill. Treadmill, they came out with soft skills. That replaced like a term before it. I can't remember what term they were talking about before. And I'm sure that term replaced the term before it. And as you go back, it gets progressively more insulting, every decade. So are we due for another rebranding of this?
I hope so, because when people are talking about soft skills, it feels like it's not as important as hard skills.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I hope there's a rebrand in its future, but maybe we can be the beginning of that.
Well, you make a good point because it's like a lot of people underestimate the value of what they refer to as soft skills. Yeah. This is something that I certainly did early in my career, being a more technical type of person. You kind of just dismiss all of that as, just window dressing, cosmetic, but you'd be surprised how incredibly valuable it is, especially if you're getting a job, especially in job interviews. I mean, they're just going off your first impressions and your charisma and your communication skills. And I mean, if you can't do that well, it's hard to make a very good first impression. So yeah. Absolutely. So let's dive into this.
Well, and with soft skills in general, when you're interviewing, I would say 95% of the interview questions that you'll probably come across are behavior-based questions, which are more focused on your soft skills, like your communication skills, your interpersonal skills, things that are not as easy to measure. Whereas hard skills are things that you can say, I have a certification in this specific area, or I know how to use this specific program. And so they're a little bit easier to quantify, hard skills versus soft skills, but they're the things that most interviewers are wanting to know these days. So we'll also talk about how to identify your transferable skills and how to showcase them in your interviews as well as in your job applications. And then also how you can use them to kind of overcome gaps that you might have, whether it's in your employment as a whole or your specific work experience that you might not have specific areas of expertise in. And so transferable skills can really change the game when it comes to applying to and interviewing for jobs. So first, what are transferable skills? Well, transferable skills are skills that can be transferred or applied across roles or industries. So some examples of transferable skills would be things like leadership, communication, problem solving, time management, adaptability, things like that. And highlighting these skills really makes you versatile and then also helps you future-proof any role. So it's a way for you to identify how you could adapt or move into any type of role that you might be interviewing for, looking to, switch industries, etc. Anything you want to add to what are transferable skills?
Well, you included a lot of stuff. I mean, I was just thinking as you were saying that, the list of what you could put on a list of transferable skills. I mean, you could put hundreds and hundreds of things on there. You could put the ability to make coffee on there. But seriously, I mean, there's so many things, like how you communicate, how you collaborate, how you present, how you negotiate, how you, phrase your ideas, how you structure your thoughts, even within the context of interviewing. You're mentioning interviewing, storytelling, like you mentioned, behavioral questions where you have to tell a story from your past, just the ability to tell a story in a correct way. And they talk about, the STAR method and these mechanical sort of tools. But beyond that, just structuring it, being able to tell a compelling story, being able to get people engaged and to care about what you're saying, all of that stuff, that's all soft skills. I don't know how you like subdivide it. You could subdivide it ad nauseum, just, picking them out. But all of that stuff, anything that's not a technical skill that you go to school and get a certificate in, would be a soft skill.
Yes. And I think that if you are feeling like you're overwhelmed by what sorts of options you have to identify those transferable skills, we'll talk about how to identify them a little bit later. But Bill and I did a live stream last week on using generative AI. And so this is another place where you could use generative AI to help you identify those transferable skills. So let's say that I have, background in nursing and I decide that I want to move into education. Those seem like two very different fields, but there's probably a lot of transferable skills there. So I might be able to upload my resume to a program like ChatGPT, which would be like a healthcare-based or nursing-based resume that I then want to apply to an education role. I would post the job posting into that as well, and then ask ChatGPT to help identify some of those transferable skills. I could even just use prompts with it. I worked as a nurse in healthcare for X number of years. I'm looking to move into an education role where I'll be doing this type of work. What are some of the transferable skills that I could highlight? So that's just a really good starting place. If you're just blanking on what sorts of skills might be transferable between those two very different industries, a generative AI program can certainly help you identify what some of those are. Makes sense. Next, let's talk about like the role of soft skills in today's job market. So why employers value soft skills? Well, their soft skills are things like your emotional intelligence, your ability to work on a team and collaborate with others, your ability to be flexible. So like, why would employers care about that? Well, the majority of jobs out there require you to have emotional intelligence, to be able to work with others, to be able to communicate well, to problem solve, to do all of these different things. So in most cases, except for very specialized, very technical roles, if you have these transferable skills, you can probably learn the more technical side of the job that you're applying to. You come with this, kind of blank slate, this open background that people can kind of mold you to do the job that they want you to do in their way. So that can actually make you a really viable candidate versus someone who has been in the industry and the world, that you're applying to for years, where they have their way of doing things. They're not as adaptable. They're not as flexible. They're not as open to creative ideas and innovation and things like that. So having these transferable skills makes you a really viable candidate for employers. It just comes down to you being able to explain that during an interview and also on your application.
Yeah. And I think that I don't know, the way I've thought of this stuff traditionally is in the context of a job interview, you're demonstrating your soft skills, like as opposed to sort of talking about. I know on kind of maybe entry-level jobs, you might mention them. You say, well, I have good collaborational skills. I have good communication skills. I'm a very professional person, whatever it is. And what I suppose there's value in doing that because you're at least signaling you understand the importance of these things. Mm-hmm. But if you're saying like, I have very good communication skills, or I have like you mentioned, emotional intelligence, in a job interview, in that kind of exchange, you're going to be demonstrating those. So you don't really have to explain, I'm a good communicator, because you are in the process of communicating to somebody, and they will see firsthand. That's the whole point of the job interview, to bring you in to see what you're like as a person. And that would be one of the more obvious things, would be to see your charisma, your communication skills, how professional you are, and things like emotional intelligence. You can like sort of gauge their reactions to what you're saying, by subtle body language and things like this. It's something that you demonstrate as well as just talk about, like that's kind of, to me, that's a big distinction. It's something that you don't mention you have, but you instead show off firsthand.
Well, and it's all very subjective too. I might say on my resume that I'm a great communicator, and then I get into my interview and the interviewers are going, this person has no communication
Give
skills.
them the most awkward experience of their life. Yes.
Yes. Yes. So interviews are a great way to really demonstrate those soft skills and those transferable skills. And I believe there's research out there. You can't quote me on it directly, but there is probably over 90%, maybe closer to 98% of hiring managers that will prioritize hiring people for their soft skills and their transferable skills over the technical ones. And again, that's because the technical skills are trainable. If I have a low emotional intelligence, I'm not going to be able to take a single course or read a single book and suddenly completely change my emotional intelligence. Whereas if I have no Excel skills or I don't know how to use a specific program, I can probably take a course or read a book or something like that, and I can suddenly have the skills to do it.
Yes. I mean, I don't want to trivialize a lot of technical skills. I find that in my experience, I've met several recruiters that hold that opinion. Technical skills are trainable. Therefore, the deciding factor should be soft skills. Well, some technical skills it's not easy to train for. If you've just been to school, university, 8 years or something to get like a master's degree in accounting or engineering, that's not something you can snap your fingers and just retrain someone to do. On the other hand, some communication skills, they are trainable. You can train people. I mean, now it does take an attitude, a willingness to learn, and a respect for it. So you could also include your attitudes towards things as perhaps part of soft skills or related to soft skills. You have a respect for these things. So I don't know. I mean, there's no like hard, fast rules, but the point is that these things are real. These things are valued. And, as you said, Abby, I mean, they are transferable. They're universal. A lot of these, like charisma, being likable. In what job would that not be a good thing? If you could just on cue be likable to people, have people like you. You know what I mean? Like I can see that not being priority one, maybe, but it would still be a good thing. So these are universally good things. A lot of them apply like across the board in almost like any job you could ever possibly have. So yeah, very important stuff.
Well, and I would say, if you're looking at a job posting, the minimum qualifications would probably include the technical skills required to do the job. If it requires significant technical skills, yes. I might need a background in engineering or accounting to be eligible to apply and get through the screening round for a specific type of job.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm going to be applying to a job that just requires a high school diploma, which why would they even just require that? And experience with customer service, then those technical skills that might be required for this specific job probably are trainable. So if you're wondering if the technical skills are required versus more just nice to have or will be easier to adjust to the role, look at those minimum qualifications on the job posting, because that will help you identify what is minimally required to apply for the job to truly have success. So that's one way to kind of decipher what technical skills must I have to be successful in this role versus what technical skills do they want me to have so that I can hit the ground running a little bit faster.
Yeah, makes sense.
So how do we identify our transferable skills? Well, you can reflect on some of your past experiences. These might be your previous work experience. Maybe you volunteered for a certain organization, or you've kind of had this trend of volunteer work, so you can find some transferable skills from that. Maybe there are some specific hobbies that you have engaged in that have given you some of these transferable skills. Maybe even things like parenting, budget management, things like that are ways that you can start to identify some of those transferable skills. There might also be some tools available to you like skills inventories or assessments. And this is where I really like to plug workforce centers here in the United States. I don't know if they are in Canada, which is where you are, Bill. But these
they have equivalent. Yeah, they have equivalent version of that. Yeah.
So it's basically, for us, at least here in Colorado, it's with our county government. So there's workforce centers associated with counties here. And it's basically a free resource for you to go. And there's career coaches there. They can help you with your resume. They also have things like assessments and courses that you can take. So if you're not really quite sure what type of transferable skills you might have, one of those workforce centers might be a good place to start. You could also just Google, like, what are my transferable skills, and see what types of assessments come up. The other one that I kind of like to plug is ONET, which is onetonline.org. It is, again, specific more to the United States because it's through our Bureau of Labor Statistics, but they have some assessments built into their platform that can be really useful to identifying what you like to do, what some of those transferable skills might be, what sorts of occupations align with the interests and hobbies that you have. So there's inventories and assessments that are available. And then you can also just ask yourself some questions like, what skills have helped me succeed in my previous roles? When I encountered these difficult situations, what sorts of skills did I call on to help me have this successful interaction or successful outcome? How are these skills then relevant in this new role that I'm applying for or interviewing for?
So we are talking about transferable skills, which are skills that apply to more than one job, sometimes jobs that are quite different. And then within that, we're talking about soft skills. And, we've kind of defined soft skills and talked about what we can do there. But there's transferable skills that are not technically soft skills. There's transferable skills that would be technical skills too, right? Like you mentioned Excel, things like this that, are broad enough that you could apply them to many different types of jobs. So those are transferable skills. Now, a lot of times those might not be the things that you would necessarily mention in a job application or in a job interview, because it's almost sort of, they're sort of subsumed into your technical skills. You have a degree in something. So yeah, I know how to use Excel, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But you would this is important because I just want to understand correctly, Abby, you're recommending that people sort of explicitly mention these things if you're changing careers or if you're moving into a job where your last job wasn't that title. So there might be a question of if you're suited to this or you're trained for it. Yes. That's kind of where this is going, right? Like you're going to mention these things explicitly.
Yep. And that's because you first need to identify your transferable skills before you then showcase them. And because if you don't know what they are, then how are you going to use them to your advantage to apply for jobs, interview for jobs, and then actually when you're in the job, prove that you were the good choice for the job? And so you want to make sure that you can identify them. And that not only gives you the language to use in these various capacities, but that also is a confidence booster. It can help you say to yourself internally, like, I am actually qualified to do this job. I might be coming from this complete different industry, or I might have taken a significant gap to act as a caretaker or a caregiver for someone. Yet I still have the skills to be able to successfully and effectively do this job. So it's not only an exercise in identifying the skills, but it's also an exercise in boosting your self-esteem and your confidence to really prove to yourself that you have the ability to do this type of work.
That's interesting because, I think a lot of people would be in that situation. You're not changing careers in the sense that you're doing like a radical shift to what was it? Accountant to lion tamer, right. You're not doing something extreme, but what you're doing, it could be interpreted as changing careers in the sense that you're going for a new job title and it's different from your previous job title. Mm-hmm. And perhaps a recruiter may not immediately understand how your previous job qualifies you to step into this different job title. And being able to explain that and illustrate it on the fly, like on cue in, say, an interview, I can see that being very valuable, where you would have to do the preparation. Like if you do the preparation for that specifically, you may understand how you're qualified, but the recruiter has a different perspective. They don't know this last job on your resume. They don't know what that is. They've never seen that. So they might not understand. So it really helps to be able to try and sort of understand their perspective, I imagine, and illustrate how you have all these different skills and you're using lingo that they understand. You're saying, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. And they go, I recognize what all those are. So, okay, that's what's required for this job. Yes. So it's more of like understanding the perspective of the other person, maybe more than understanding yourself. At least that's how it's seeming to me.
Yes. Well, and I've actually had this conversation with probably 3 people in the last 4 days, which is
wow.
When we are creating documents or tailoring our resume, our cover letter, and preparing for interviews, it's not really about showcasing what is most important to us during that process. It's about identifying what the other person wants to know about how we're going to be a good fit. So while I might be really excited to talk about this one achievement, it might not matter to the person on the other side of the screen or on the other, side of the table. So you need to be able to identify why the recruiter is talking to you. What do they want from you when it comes to this conversation, from your application? Why does the hiring manager have interest in you? Why would this person at this networking event want to talk to you? So it's identifying what is in it for them so that you can then connect the dots for them. And that's really hard to do because our ego sometimes gets in the way and is like, well, this is really important and I need to mention this. But if we don't frame it in a way that's valuable to the other person, then they're going to go ahead and just pass us by.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's like a big hindrance to a lot of people doing well in job interviews, certainly, is because, as an applicant or a candidate, you don't understand the perspective of the recruiter, yet you're having to win over the recruiter to believing that, you're the perfect person for the role.
Right.
So, if you're dealing with someone that, like, let's say your previous 2 jobs were in, I don't know, a certain field, I don't know, printing, like not 3D printing, but traditional printing, it's kind of printing on paper and cardstock and that kind of stuff. Now, they've never worked in that industry. They don't know what involves that. The job that they're currently hiring for, while it may, it's said in the requirements that they're looking for someone with all the things that you have with your background in printing, the recruiter doesn't understand anything about the printing business, doesn't understand what's involved in doing those jobs. So when you get to the job interview, you feel qualified and you think that, oh, that's pretty obvious. Like, I'm a printer. So there you go. Enough said. Like, you understand what that is. Meanwhile, the recruiter is thinking, a printer? What's that? I don't know what that is. Do you have any of these skills? I'm not hearing you mention any of these requirements. So I can only conclude that you're not qualified for it. Right. So I can understand, like, if you've done your preparation in advance and you understand that these are transferable skills and you know a good way of articulating it so the recruiter can understand what you're talking about. You're not using printing press industry lingo to the recruiter. You're using universal lingo that everybody understands what that is. I can see the value of that, of like, training yourself so that you can convince someone who doesn't know anything about printing of just what your capabilities are, and they see you as very valuable.
Well, and that's a really great segue into talking about how we can showcase our transferable skills, both in the application process as well as during interviews. And there are, first case, when you're applying to a job, you're likely uploading your resume in some capacity, whether it's copying and pasting into their application system or literally uploading a document. And this is why tailored resumes are so critical, because I might have been applying to printing related jobs for the last 10 years. And now I'm suddenly applying to a completely different industry. If I use my printing resume, that makes no sense to the person in the other industry. So tailored resumes with tailored bullet points that demonstrate your achievements tied to the soft skills or the transferable skills to successfully do the new job are really critical. Now, most people, when they're faced with this task of creating a tailored resume, they can become frustrated with the process because it feels really tedious. At the same time, if you don't spend the effort to tailor your resume to the job, then it will probably just be, flopped into the not a good fit pile immediately. So we need to spend some time, if we're really interested in the job, tailoring it to the job. And again, to plug our last stream about the generative AI, this is where ChatGPT and other programs like that can be really helpful in us streamlining this process. So you can compare an old resume to a new resume and ask it, what sorts of gaps am I seeing? What, where could I have some improvements? Things like that. You could compare your old resume to the job posting and then ask for those transferable skills. You can then create your new resume, your tailored resume, and compare it to the job posting and see if there's anything you were missing. So it's a great way to basically have a career coach or a resume reviewer in your back pocket to do this work for you initially. You still want to make sure that you're, reviewing the information, that you're not using it as your final draft. And you want to make sure that the information it's generating for you is accurate, but it's a great way to really streamline that tailored resume process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like translating what you have into a more universal language. That's what I'm getting out of it. I never thought about that before. That's actually a quite useful thing. It's almost like, okay, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, I'm sure you've read a lot more resumes than I have, Abby, but I've gone through quite a few in my time. And that's a kind of recurring thing where you look at someone's work history, and unless they're like right in my industry and I know exactly what that job is, usually I'm kind of puzzled as to what that role really is that you're referring to, especially if it has a more generic sounding name, like, accounts executive, something like that. It's like what does that mean? Does that mean, you were literally an executive, you were like in charge of an entire sales, hierarchy or something, or you were just someone who answered phones in an office? What does that mean? I can't picture it. And so a lot of the things that they put on their resume, there'd be basic things like, for example, like don't use acronyms, like use more universal stuff. But this is almost like a super version of that, where like, okay, beyond just using acronyms, we want the person to actually understand and visualize like what each of these things are on the resume, so that we can understand how they might relate to the job that we're recruiting for. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's almost like translating what you have into like non-industry, like the opposite of shop talk, like non-industry specific lingo,
Yep. Well, and I mean, even the same thing goes for formatting. If I'm a graphic designer or a real estate agent, I might have a very like colorful document with my photo on it or something like that. And if I'm applying to work in like an administrative role, I'm not going to have a lot of color. I'm not going to have my picture on my resume. I'm not going to have a lot of those things.
They are angered by the very idea of color on a resume. Exactly. Yeah.
How dare you use something other than black and white? So there's a lot of things that kind of go into this. And, we're kind of getting a little off track from the transferable skills topic, but I think that it's still really relevant, because when you are converting your documents to match for a different industry that you're applying to, a different type of job that you might be applying to, you still have to take all of these things into consideration to give yourself a fighting chance at being actually looked at by a person in the hiring process.
Yeah, it's like a twofold thing. One is the lingo, but one is like what you're saying, where you're almost doing like an analysis of the tasks you did or the work you did, and you're drawing out like specific skills or specific things that would be, universally recognized, right? That would have, because there's a lot of things that, that a lot of jobs have in common, a lot of activities that you do, but some of the things that are perceived as being universal, or they're recognized, or they're perceived as having value, you're wanting to try and identify those and then pull those out and specifically mention them, and mention them in a way that people recognize them and understand what they are. That's what it seems like. It's not, you're working on language, but you're also working on an analysis of your entire job and trying to identify those.
And again, it's creating these documents and preparing for your conversation for the other person.
Yes.
Not about you. It's about what the other person is looking for. And
Absolutely.
This isn't saying that you are going to be disingenuous or you're going to be dishonest or anything like that. It's just tailoring your approach to meet the other person with where they're at. And so about resumes, the same overall advice applies to cover letters and things like that. But interviews is another place where it's going to be really critical that you're able to communicate your transferable skills for this role. And so I think the most effective way to do this is using the STAR or the CAR technique, which is, if you were to Google it, you'll get a bajillion results about how to do it and what it is and what it means. But essentially, STAR is STAR. So situation, task, action, and result. And then my preference is CAR, just because it's a shorter acronym to remember, which is context, action, and result. So context kind of combines the situation and task part of STAR. And so you want to use one of these methods to help you really formulate your responses to any interview question that comes up that is more behavior-based or situation-based. And that's what lets you really show off and showcase your skills that are transferable from your old role, your old industry, whatever it might be, to this new role or industry. It's how you connect the dots for the interviewer, for the recruiter, for the hiring manager, for whoever it is that you might be talking to. What you want to really focus on with your answer to any interview question are the results that you achieved. And so you want to make sure that those results that you're choosing to share are relevant to the person that you're talking to. So again, you're really tailoring and focusing your answers and your responses to these types of interview questions to what does the interviewer want to know? If they're asking me this question, what are they getting at? Why are they asking me this question? So that's the hardest part about the interview process, is because sometimes we black out and we don't even, our brain stops working. So we feel like we need to use these canned responses. But if you can take a moment to pause in the moment and really ask yourself that question, then you can identify what is most important to the interviewer, why they're asking you this question, and how your response can really showcase how you're going to be the best fit for this role, even if you don't have all of the, exact skills or exact experience they're looking for, but you do know that you can do the work.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting the bit you said there about it's the results part that they're wanting to tune in on. I've had stuff where obviously the action part is kind of the main part of it. Like I remember years ago, I did some teaching on the side, and I remember being asked in the interview, how would you discipline a student, or or some kind of situation that arises for a teacher, what's your approach, how would you handle that, right? So it was mainly like the results were we solved the problem, but the action part is well, first I do this and I do that, then I do this. If this was the case, I'd look into that. If that was the case, I would do this. Then I would make sure that everybody understands that, and then blah blah blah. So it's like the action part, it can be pretty important too. The key thing is that it's not the first two. It's not the S and the T. Those are kind of, you just want to say those very quickly. Like you say car, context. It was this job, 2 years ago I was working in this role and this situation arose. Yep. There you go. That's your context.
Yep.
And then here's what I did. You go into more detail and here's how it turned out.
Yes. And I think that's a really good point to make, is that even though they might be more focused on the results, if you skip over the actions, or you're not including enough information about the actions that you took or that you would take in a situation, is going to leave enough gaps for the interviewer to question if what you're saying is truly how you would respond, or if you've actually had experience with that. So when you can be a little bit more specific with your actions portion of your response, then the results tend to make sense for them, and they understand, how you're able to achieve those results. Now, one of the things that will often come up, and again, we're kind of going on a tangent from this, but I think it's relevant.
Yeah, we seem to do that a lot, but but that's where the fun is. Yeah.
Right. With the results, most people will not want to share something that they don't have any experience with, or they'll share something that didn't actually have a positive outcome. So when you're thinking about the results that you want to share, you want to be strategic about it, because, if it's a hypothetical, then how would you, what type of results would you expect to achieve? If your result was a failure, you don't just want to end on that negative note. You want to end on, what did you learn? How might you do it differently based off of the results that you did achieve? So you want to put more of a positive spin on it, even if there was a negative outcome. And it's been interesting. I've worked with a lot of people who, I'll ask them a question about conflict. Tell me about a time that you experienced conflict in the workplace. And almost everyone is like, oh, they either go to this place where it's the super unprofessional conflict, or they're like, everyone loves me, I never have conflict with anyone, which is also a red flag for people and for interviewers. So you want to think back to any time that maybe you had your hackles raised, or you felt a little defensive, or you noticed that there was maybe something going on and you could step in and kind of talk about those sorts of things. But you don't want to go to something that is super unprofessional. That would be a red flag for the interviewers. And you also don't want to go to something that's oh, well, that never happens to me. I never experienced that in the workplace. So you've got to do
I'm just too perfect.
Yes.
I've never had conflict with anyone in my life, actually.
Everyone loves me. Like, I'm sure they do.
What are the kids saying these days? Hack, just a hack. The answer to conflict is communication. So the answer to any kind of conflict is some kind of communication.
Yep.
That's usually how that goes. So
and
just remember that.
Yep. And communication is like the kind of heart of most conflict, miscommunication about something. And so even if you don't have a professional experience with it, the way that you handle conflict in your personal life might also be a good example that you could use. Again, you got to be a little bit strategic about how you present it, the context or the situation and task that you share. But if you feel like you don't have any professional experience with a certain question that comes up, try to draw on your education. Maybe there was a time where you were working on a group project in school, or maybe there was a time that you had a difficult conversation with a family member. So there's all these different pieces of your world that you can pull in that will transfer the way that you handle that situation to this new role.
Yeah, and preferably something that's relatively recent. Don't go back to when you were in second grade or something. I resolved this by eating their paste, kind of. There we go. No. My career coach told me to say that.
Well, and that's the other thing to keep in mind is how relevant are these responses? And if it's been more than 15 years, it's probably not relevant. Because there's hopefully a time that you've experienced something similar in the last 10 to 15 years.
Yes. Makes sense. So we're talking about the behavioral questions. We're talking about answering in the STAR format and some stuff. Now, how this relates to transferable skills is you were saying, if I understand correctly, that, okay, when you get asked a behavioral interview question, a job interview, and you answer in this format, you're saying that you are going to try and draw out transferable skills specifically when you answer these questions. In what sense? In the sense that like they might not understand something industry specific, so you want to make it more generalized or something like that. Is that kind of,
Yeah.
Like, how would you do that? How would you do that for, like, say, a communication problem? Does that enter into it if you're talking about like like they're asking you a behavioral question about a communication related thing, a conflict related thing. Okay. How to resolve conflict. How would you specifically like draw out a transferable skill from that or do anything different?
Yeah. So let's say that I'm applying to a role that is more of like an account management role where I might have different accounts that I'm working with, and I have contact with these people that are like my clients within this organization. And let's say that the interviewers prompt me with an interview question that is like, hypothetically, let's say that you have a particularly difficult account that you're managing. They're, tend to be, rather defensive. They point the finger. How might you handle interacting with that account when you know that it's important to our organization to continue to work with that account? And maybe I've never done that type of work before, but I have worked in customer service at a call center where I get irate customers calling in, where I have to de-escalate the situation, listen to them, identify their problems, things like that. So that's a great kind of crossover, even though my like call service or call center experience might not on the surface be explicitly similar to this account manager job. The skills that I will use in that customer phone call de-escalation situation are going to be very similar to the skills that I'll be using when I'm interacting with a potential account or client to de-escalate, get us both, aligned with the same goals, communicate, listen, all of those things will be very similar. Now, the language that I'm using will probably be slightly different, but the actual actions that I'm taking when I'm doing my STAR response or my CAR response will likely be similar. So while you can say, you probably wouldn't blatantly say, well, I have no experience dealing with a specific account like that.
Nor do I wish to, yeah.
Right. But you can say, in my experience in this particular role, very often we were, faced with customers who would call in who were really frustrated about their experience. And I found that it was most effective to listen to them first. So that's how I would approach this situation. Then I would move into more solutions oriented, like problem solving. What is it that they're hoping to achieve by this? What may have been, missed with the previous interaction they had with us, things like that. If you can talk through your thought process of how you would potentially address that type of situation, that's more of what the interviewer is looking for.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So we're talking about transferable skills. We're drawing out soft skills, because soft skills, at least the way I've always thought of them, is that they're pretty much universal, or they're very wide, put it that way. But also the technical skills. See, I never thought of that aspect of it, like analyzing your technical skills to write them in a more universally recognized way. You know what I mean? Because I think everybody has a tendency to, when they write their resume, and then by extension, what they say in an interview, they'll write their resume in the sense that, like, this is literally what I did. So they're using industry specific lingo. They're talking they're using terms that maybe people don't understand. Maybe it's a convention at that company or something, or that organization. They refer to it like that, but in the wider world, people use a different term for it, something like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like maybe conflict resolution, like you were just talking about, that could be like one of those where in that company, they might have their own lingo, saying like, I handled a customer, or maybe the way an accountant would phrase that, they would have an accounting term,
Yes.
I sort of.
Maybe they have a specific acronym that they follow. Like our organization follows this acronym for conflict resolution.
Yeah, I sort of minimized, percentage of bad debt customers, something like that. When what that translates to is that you got on the phone with them, you through a sort of process of, making a custom arrangement, or having some charisma, or making them want to deal with you, or knowing how to counter maybe some passive aggressive tactics or something, you manage to get them to eventually pay their bill or something like that. You know what I mean? So the way an accountant would phrase it would be maybe with an accounting term that possibly a recruiter might not understand because it's not universal. So for the accountant, you might want to sort of translate that into a more generalized, recognized term, like by saying conflict resolution, or mediation, conflict mediation, with customers, or, something like that. I mean, if I was an accountant, I'd be able to give you some lingo for it, but like it's that translation of what you do. You've never thought of like calling it anything else, because that's the official term for your little world. Like in this case, accounting, that's what you call it. But that might not be recognized by, say, a recruiter who is thinking of hiring you to put you in, like, I don't know, like in some sort of like managerial accounting position or something,
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why ChatGPT or programs like it can be so valuable with kind of analyzing your resume, as well as using someone that who's not in the same industry you're coming from. If you were to send me your resume and I were looking over it, I would be asking questions like, well, what does this acronym mean? What does this look like? So maybe someone that who isn't in the same industry as you would be a great resource to do that with. Based off of my resume, do you have any questions about what this work means? Maybe I'm not going to send it to the, people living in my direct household, because they might know what I'm talking about on a regular basis, but someone who I might interact with regularly, frequently, just doesn't know the ins and outs of the work that I do. They can give you that type of feedback of, does this seem more universal that anyone would be able to understand what this means? Or does this seem more specific to your company or your industry that doesn't translate to this new role that you might be applying to?
Okay. Now, maybe this is bad form to do this, but you said something earlier about like a command or how to use ChatGPT specifically to get it to translate, I think it was your resume, into a more universal sort of like draw out those skills. What was the script or the command, or how did you recommend that you use ChatGPT to do this more specifically?
You could just talk to it you could basically ask it to do what you're wanting to do. So what I would recommend doing, and this is, very vague, situational, not super specific, but I would say take your resume and take the job posting, copy each of those and paste them into ChatGPT. And the prompt that you would use is, I am, a job seeker and I'm looking to apply to the job posting pasted below. And I would paste that below. I've also included my most recent resume that is more blank industry specific. what recommendations do you have to convert my resume to be more specific to the job posting I'd like to apply to? And then you can start there. From that prompt, then you can ask it more specific questions. How might you, or please generate 20 bullet points for me that are based off of my resume for this new job that I might be applying to for my most recent role. Generate 5 bullet points, generate 10 quantifiable metric-based bullet points, things like that you can just build on within that prompting for ChatGPT.
Okay, because in the past we've talked about combining those two things in ChatGPT. You put in your resume, you put in the job posting, and then you would say something to the effect of like, could you rewrite my resume so it's more tailored to apply for this job? It's more of a fit for this role. So would you still do that, but tack on a sort of extra instruction and say, please accentuate or draw out more transferable skills that are universally recognized or something like that? Like, would you do it that way, or you recommend because what I got from you a moment ago, it's good, but it seemed like you're not asking it to do it. You're saying, what was it? How would you rewrite, or how would you draw out the transferable skills? Do you have any recommendations for it? Yeah. So it's not doing it all in that one command. It's just sort of giving you advice, right?
Now, what you could do as well is say, based off of my resume and the job posting pasted below, what are the 10 most important transferable skills that I should highlight for this job?
Okay, gotcha.
So that might be something that you could do. And it would then, give you those transferable skills. And then you could say, okay, how might I integrate these transferable skills into my tailored resume for this new job? And so you don't want to ask it to do too much too soon, because its output limit is limited. I guess that's the way to say it. So you kind of want to focus on one thing at a time with it, and then it builds on it. It kind of uses its memory of what your conversation has been to then, give you more specific outputs through the ChatGPT program. And so I would start big and kind of then funnel down to be more specific, and then go from there. And if it's not giving you what you're wanting, and if it's not generating what you're wanting, then, start a new chat and start fresh with a new prompt or something like that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and that's something we haven't talked about. Maybe everybody knows this already, but I discovered it only a couple of months ago. But it's almost like it's got 2 levels of memory. One level is like within the discussion that you're having with it, it remembers everything from the beginning. But then when you delete that discussion, it loses it all. But then you have a more like a permanent memory where you can tell it, like, remember, whenever I ask for a resume rewrite, I want it to be, a page and a half, or, something like this. Remember, I want you to use a very high level of language when you rewrite my resume, or, whatever, like you can put all these little things and have it saved permanently in the memory so that you don't have to manually specify that stuff every single time.
Yep.
So for people that are using ChatGPT, if you're not quite at the point where you've started using like the memory and the programmable memory that's like permanent, that is there, and you have access to that. That can really speed up a lot of these processes.
Yes. Yep. And then we had someone comment, Johnny said, and most AI programs are quite good at iterative, ongoing conversational talk. It's spooky in some ways. It really is. Like, these programs are constantly learning, and they're learning your style of conversation. They're learning your preferences. They're learning what you want it to generate for you, which is very spooky.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a third level of memory where it just gets used to you over weeks, and like your lingo, all the little things you've told it to do. It sort of just seems to retain some of those, or if not all of them, and then just conform to your style, on the way going forward.
Well, and I actually saw, this is another tangent, but the amazing things that ChatGPT and generative AI can do is, I saw a video of a gentleman who decided to attach or kind of link ChatGPT to his Gmail, and he would not respond to any of his emails until the end of the day. And ChatGPT would generate responses based off of his previous response styles, and then would save all of his responses to those emails for the end of the day. He would go through, make some minor edits, and then just click send, kind of in a mass sending at the end of the day.
That's awesome. I wonder how many years you could keep that going before people realize that they're not actually talking to you. They're talking to your mother and your work colleagues, and they're responding to job offers and everything, just on the assumption that that's what you would probably say if you were writing it yourself, right? Yep. It'd be interesting to see how far you could get away with that.
Well, and I think that responding at the very end of the day is probably also not the most professional way to go about it. So you might want to, respond at, 3 different times throughout the day to not make people wait for your response for the end of the day. But many people are in email jobs where you're spending a lot of time in email communicating back and forth with people. So that might be a way that you could really streamline your communication skills.
I'm going to fall down the rabbit hole here. I'm going to tell a story very briefly about this. It's when I was in my 20s, I worked at the railroad, and it was a very, very weird industry. And there was a manager, a sort of mid-level manager, who was in charge of 500 people. And the organization had a problem, a very common problem, where a lot of things would bottleneck through senior managers because they insisted upon everything requiring approval. So you would say, I want to do this. Can I go ahead and do this? And then you'd send that off and you'd never get a response. So things just sort of sat in limbo. So this manager, I had a conversation with him, and he told me that his policy for responding to emails, because he would get over 100 emails a day, and this is years ago, the way he handled it was, what he told me was, he would, when his inbox got unmanageable, there was several hundred emails in there and they're all to read, he would just delete everything, and under the strategy that if it's important, it'll come back to me. Mm-hmm. And that's how he handled it. I was like, I could not believe that. And so, we're talking about AI answering your emails. It's there are people out there that need help, and I can see them, making use of some version of this, yep, to take a lot of the work off, responding to all this stuff. So anyway, just a random story.
Yes. Well, and that stresses me out because I'm not the kind of person, I'm a people pleaser. So I would never want to, make someone feel like I don't care about them, or I, don't care about what they've been asking me. So I would never just delete their emails with no response and then assume that they would follow up with me if it was that important. And at the same time, there's a dark side of me that's that would feel so good to just mass delete everything out of my inbox.
One of these years, you're going to set the dark side free, and it'll be so liberal. You'll never go back. In the railroad, that wasn't too much of a concern.
Uh-huh.
I don't want anyone to be upset.
Yeah.
That was kind of priority Z 258,
Yeah.
So there we go. So where are we on transferable skills? We covered what it is. We covered kind of definitions, and I'm glad we went into that because I'm understanding a bit more the implications of this. And this is actually a lot more useful and practical than I thought it was at the sort of outset here. This can solve a very real problem of you knowing that you're qualified for something, but yet you can't successfully communicate that on a resume or in a job interview in a way that the recipient can understand. So this is a real solution to that.
Yeah. Well, and really the final piece of showcasing your transferable skills is using it through networking, because most jobs are found through your network. As much as people don't want to believe it, as upsetting as it could be, when we have these connections with people who can then refer us to jobs or connect us directly with a hiring manager, that makes the application process significantly easier. So we want to be able to share stories with people in our network about how our transferable skills drove results and how that might apply to a job that we are interested in or an industry that we're looking to join, something like that. So it's a way for us to connect with others further.
That's a great point. It's if you're over here in this business and there's another job over here in this business, maybe it's a similar job title, but it's a slightly different industry or something, there's some, it's still appropriate, but there could be issues in trying to sort of convince people that yes, I can do that. Wouldn't it be great if you could sort of start explaining what you have or what you've done or what your capabilities are in such a way that the person over here goes yes, they understand everything you're saying. They realize the value of it. They see the value of it. They recognize it all. Wouldn't that be great? That's kind of what this is trying to solve.
Yes.
So it's about expressing yourself in such a way, using the right terms and talking about the right things that are recognized and are valued on the other end.
Yes. Well, and I think we would essentially use our network as connectors. So it's being able to describe our transferable skills to someone who then will make the connection for us about how good of a fit we might be for a role or for a company or an organization. And really, the thing that's I think most frustrating people about your network is that you have to be nurturing it and engaging with your network pretty much regularly. And you can't just like decide, oh, I need a network today, so I'm going to suddenly create this network. It's this like long-term investment. But if we are having these conversations with people in our network, if we are, being a little bit proactive about it, it will give us, we'll reap significant benefits from it.
Yeah, definitely. It works. I mean, there's many different ways of doing networking. That's certainly one of them, but it is possible to reach out to people and stuff. But
Mhm.
but you have the same problem is going to be communicating your value. And
Yes.
it's almost like transferable skills are sort of the universal way of communicating your value across possibly industries, across companies, across different cultures. They have their own lingo and their own, terminology and their own way of like organizing things, um, across sort of people's functions. So like a hiring manager will have industry specific technical knowledge. A recruiter maybe won't have that, but they'll have knowledge of, HR and, sort of the standard process of recruitment and selection. So you're talking to two different people that come from different departments, you know, uh, and also if you have a panel interview, which, you get both of those people in a panel interview, you might get the CEO or you might get an accountant or someone else, a salesperson, in a panel interview. Wouldn't it be great if you could express yourself in such a way that not, you don't have a situation where only one person on that panel understands what you're talking about. You say something that's universally recognized and then they all recognize that that's a good thing.
Mhm.
So I can see the value of this quite a bit. It seems
Yeah.
like those are real problems that are standing in the way of qualified people like getting hired for positions that they could do. And it's these kind of inefficiencies that are preventing it from happening.
Yes.
So
Well, and I
no.
think that's a great segue to kind of the last like conversation point, which is talking about how we can overcome employment gaps using our transferable skills. Now, you might have an employment gap that is a gap in industry. Like I used that example earlier of nursing going into education. And so that could be considered a gap. I don't have any education background, specifically, but I do have this background in nursing. And how do those transferable skills show or display that I'm a great candidate for this new role? Then there's also the gaps like taking time off from through paid employment for personal growth, caregiving for someone, volunteer work, things like that. And so transferable skills are skills that we use every single day. We might use it to, in freelance work that we do. We might do it by building skills through volunteer work, through caregiving, things like that. So you want to make sure that you can identify those transferable skills, even if you feel like you do have a gap and that you're not going to be, their like immediate first choice based off of previous experience. But if you can reframe your narrative as this change is really strategic and proactive, and I have these skills that will help me really bring value to your organization, and here's why I'm a great fit, that confidence matters. And so if you can believe it based off of the skills that you've identified for yourself as being a good fit for the company, for the team, for the organization, then hopefully you can convey that not only in your documents that you use to apply, but also in the actual interview process.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It's like, it's almost like someone needs to write like a guide for this. Because if you think like what you were talking about with the nursing thing, it's like, okay, nurses, I mean, I don't know much about nursing, but nurses deal with people. They deal with patients, right? So like, okay, you have a lot of skills that pertain to dealing with people in many different situations for many different reasons. So it's like people are a universal thing, right? Like across every industry, you're going to be dealing with people, right? Business is maybe a universal thing, or approaching a universal thing. Money, like accounting or finance, is kind of a universal thing. That's why a lot of accomplishments, they quantify it in terms of money or the impact you had financially. You could almost like start these and there'd be like a hierarchy of like, okay, anything to do with people. What skills do you have with people? What situations do you do with people? Have you ever had to, I don't know, break up a fight in the workplace? Have you ever had to negotiate and really play hardball? Have you ever had to coach someone that's got mental health issues, or get them some help, or, or resolve conflicts in various types of various complexities, like that, or like business concerns, budgets, this kind of stuff, or organizational issues. I solved this organizational issue. Numbers, like technical stuff. We were talking about Excel earlier by saying, I have skills in spreadsheets, and I can use Excel, and I can use Visual Basic, or, whatever people use in Excel. Like you could almost make a hierarchy and then break it down and say like, okay, can you translate your skills in terms of these things? Anything to do with people, anything to do with business type things, anything to do with financial type things, anything to do with money, like numbers, like, like what technical people would do, and the tools you use. And then you could almost translate everything you do into like universal things that use common lingo that we've all heard of. And you could have a job that someone doesn't know what they do. I'm a water sanitation plant night shift supervisor, whatever. Like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that looks like.
Right.
Are you like a janitor, or do you supervise 2,000 people? It's hard to tell, but you could communicate it in such a way. This is what I do specifically, blam, bam, 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 bam. And it's all these things that we all understand, and then if that went presumably to a recruiter or a hiring manager or anyone else, they would understand immediately, okay, I now really genuinely understand what you do. And I can see how many of those would be useful here.
Yes. Well, and actually the way that I might help someone do it, it's similar to your approach that you're describing, is asking them about why they did what they did in the past. So I'll use my example of nursing to education, because I think I can connect the dots there for someone like that.
Sure.
So if I'm working with someone who is in nursing and is wanting to convert to education, whether it's like training and development, actually teaching, whatever that might look like, I'll say, okay, well, tell me about nursing. Why did you choose nursing to start with? Let's figure out what about nursing connected with your values and your intrinsic motivators and things like that. And so they might say something like, well, I wanted to go into nursing because I really wanted to help people. Okay, tell me about helping people. What does that look like? What were you wanting to achieve by helping people? They might say, okay, well, I really wanted to help people through like their darkest times and really improve the patient experience. Okay, tell me about how you did that. So a lot of open-ended questions to get these people like starting to think and connect the dots for themselves. So then we might get to a point where the person who was in nursing or in the medical field is realizing that a lot of the reason why they liked the job that they were doing in nursing was the education aspect. They liked teaching people about their own health and helping them find the resources to care for themselves outside of the hospital or the doctor's office they might be in. And then we can take that and really connect that to what they're wanting to do next, which is the education. So, okay, you told me that you really liked helping people. You wanted to help them during, some really tough times. You did this through patient care and patient education. Right there, we've got the dots that connect us to educating others. And so sometimes it just takes an external person or entity, whatever that might be, to really prompt you to get your brain thinking about how your one previous experience is connected to this new experience. And, it could be the same thing with parenting. What sorts of things with parenting did you ever experience that relate to this new role with, administrative assistance, whatever that might be? Well, you had to do lots of coordinating. You had to do budgets. You had to do planning. You had to do calendars. You had to do communication. You had to do all this stuff that is also relevant to, this maybe more administrative job that you're applying to. So
yeah,
it's kind of asking those open-ended questions, identifying the why and the purpose that then can resonate with other people, regardless of their background and the work that they're doing. And so there's a TED Talk, and I'll see if I can find the link for it and maybe post it in the comments of our videos once our stream is over, but it's defining your purpose and then sharing that instead of what you do. And I believe it's Simon Sinek who has a quote that says, people don't care what you do, they care why you do it. And so identifying your why for the jobs or the industry that you were in the past, that can also be a very similar why for the new role that you're interested in doing. And if you can connect those dots and get people really bought into your why and your purpose, the what and the how can come secondary.
It's interesting. It's like you're talking about nursing to education. And I was thinking like, okay, I can't remember what you mentioned, but you mentioned something that it seemed like it was like an inspirational type thing. Like one of the skills or one of the activities or tasks you do as say a nurse is something to do with getting people inspired. So maybe a patient has low morale. They're feeling very depressed. And, you can have them on meds or stuff, but there's like almost like a coaching therapy kind of component to it where, and maybe it's a situation where like the nurse is going to deal with this because it's in the moment and it's in the hospital and you just have to deal with something right there. So you almost have to pep talk somebody through, this. Now you could say, okay, well, I can inspire people. Now, can that translate to inspiring students in the classroom? I want to make this material come alive. I want you to feel good about it. I want you to realize how cool this stuff is to learn or something. Yep. And you know what I mean? Like, so you've got technical skills, but we were talking about people skills. I'm sure there's like a universal way you could express that so that someone in the nursing field could like recognize, okay, yeah, that's definitely part of the job. We need people that can do that. And in education, they also recognize that same point and say, yes, we need that. We need teachers who can do that, right? They see the value in it. They recognize what it means. So writing out your skill set in those terms, and so that everything is transferable. And that gives you a much more flexible resume that you can apply for different types of jobs with. And you'd probably get a lot further. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, and, a very technical skill in nursing might be measuring out and administering a certain type of medication. And that has no relevance in, if I'm going to be like a teacher for elementary education. Like those two things don't matter. But being able to meet my patients where they're at, speak to them at their, understanding level, being able to communicate effectively with them so that they not only understand, but then can follow the, requirements when they go home. Like all of those things then will translate to elementary education if I want to be a teacher like that. So it's really about identifying what skills you've used in the past and how that is relevant and how it will help you be successful and effective in the role that you are wanting to move into next.
For the record, I think that what you just mentioned, like measuring the doses for giving different medication to patients, I think that clearly has a parallel in teaching. It's like, if you give someone the wrong dose, they could die. It's very, very important that you are accurate, with these things. You don't like just do it haphazard, casually, quickly, and you goof something up and whoops, it's like, maybe that translates to like, when I grade exams or something. And when I write the grades down, I triple check everything. I take pride in my attention to detail, and I do not make clerical errors like that, because it's a very big deal if you swap a student that has an A and an F or something, you know what I mean? And that stuff does happen, people that don't have a lot of attention to detail, it has a lot of impact. So, you could
just define
draw that stuff out
versus a transferable skill. So the technical skill is like actually administering the medication that isn't necessarily applicable, but the underlying skill of accuracy and attention to detail, that's the transferable skill that totally matters. So there might be a situation in an interview where I, am talking about how important it is to make sure I have the right medication, to measure the right dosage, and to administer it accurately. Like those three things directly translated to education might not make a lot of sense, but I can use my STAR or my CAR method to connect the dots by saying, okay, so, in my previous role in nursing, it was really important that we, identified the correct medication. We, had the right dosage, and we administered it correctly. Here's how that applies to this role and why the skills I have from my nursing connect to this new role that I want to apply for.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what level of abstraction that you want to go to here, but you just said again, like, this does not apply to that. And I was saying, like, applying like a shot to somebody, it's like, well, you're following a procedure and you're having to do a repetitive process where you follow the procedure and you've got to get it right every time. You can't take shortcuts, you can't goof it up. You do follow the procedure 90% of the time. It's like, no, it has to be 100. And
well, let's say that I'm working in a classroom where there might be food allergies and I have to administer an EpiPen or something like that. Like, those are skills.
Well, literally, yeah. If you're applying a shot, but I'm saying, like, the mental, what's the word? Like the abilities, because when you're doing this in the real world, as we all know, you're doing it when you're overworked, you're doing it under like conditions of urgency. Maybe you're distracted. Maybe there's a lot of activity going on around you. It's very easy to lose where you are, like you've, so, I mean, I'm sure you could draw out like, different skills and qualities you have. So you understand the importance of accuracy. You understand the importance of following procedures to the T, even when it's inconvenient, even when there's a lot of pressure to not do so and cut corners. You could translate that to a lot of other things. So, I mean,
yes,
it really depends on like how far you want to abstract it. But I mean, you could almost take almost anything you do and look at the fundamental skills that are required in doing that, like the practical side of it.
Yes.
And say, well, this is what I can do. I can keep a clear head when there's all kinds of distractions. How does that translate to a rowdy classroom where you're trying to teach a lesson? Yeah. I mean, so it's about maybe thinking more like this and drawing some of those out that are universally recognized. Yep. So if nothing else, when you get into a job interview and they ask you tell me about a time when you had to, I don't know, maintain your cool under a lot of stress and do something properly, you'd have a lot to talk about, right? And it's all universal stuff. I think it's great.
Yes. And that's why preparing for your interviews ahead of time is so critical. If I were to be in nursing and then choose to go to education and not do any prep, if I were to use ChatGPT to convert my nursing resume to an education resume, not really read it over, submit it, go through that process and get called for an interview and not do any prep ahead of time, I will flounder. I will just blank. I might not have a lot of great ideas on how I can connect the dots. But if I spend even an hour just thinking back about my previous experience and how it relates to this role and asking myself some of those questions and trying to connect the dots for myself, that right there will set me apart from other candidates who are in similar positions significantly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I certainly do. Most people have a problem thinking on their feet when you're at, say, a job interview, you're on somebody else's turf, you're out of your comfort zone, you got a couple of people staring at you that you don't know. The preparation really matters. It's the thing you fall back on. So you get in there and you just go through your prepared stuff that you rehearsed, and you can fall back on that.
Yes. And if I don't do much preparation, then I'm going to really I'm just going to stumble over my words. I'm not going to be really prepared to make the connections for others. I'm going to be talking in my nursing language and telling nursing stories that are not necessarily relevant to the education things that I might be doing. So it just can be, you want to prepare, and thinking about these transferable skills is a great way to get yourself in the mindset of connecting the dots for others.
Definitely. So what I'm taking away from this is that it's just a different way of thinking. Now you can do this as an actual step when you convert your resume over. That's what we were kind of talking about before with ChatGPT. There's several ways you could do it, I imagine, but just you could actually, input different commands to get it to actually do this. But in addition to that, it's about a way of thinking about how you write your resume, what you put on there, trying to step outside of simply, the default thing. I did this particular job, I did this activity, and instead think about what universal skill does that demonstrate that is transferable, so that you could change industries, you could go to different job titles and people would see, oh, okay, you have that trait or that quality or that ability, that's underlying the actual tasks you've done. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's like an actual thing to do your resume, and it's also a way of thinking. And if you think like that, that'll give you a lot more stuff to talk about in a job interview. It'll allow you to have more appeal, so that your stuff, your pitch, doesn't fall on deaf ears quite as much. When you're talking to a different person that doesn't come from exactly the same place you do.
Right. Well, and we've titled this live stream, "The Secret to Career Success: Why Transferable Skills Matter More Than Ever." And hopefully we've been able to connect those dots for people who have been listening in. If you don't focus on your transferable skills and you're focusing purely on those like technical skills that are very specific to the job you're in, then you're not going to have career success if you're wanting to move outside of that in any way. So having career success is being able to identify these transferable skills and then connect the dots for people who are talking to you in a networking capacity, in a recruiter capacity, in a hiring manager capacity, even in a, like when I'm in the job talking to the people that I'm working with or the customers that I'm serving. All of these skills are really relevant at all times during your career. So forgetting about them, not focusing on them, just will put you at a disadvantage compared to everyone else.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, that's been really informative, Abby. I like doing these because I always learn something with each one that we do. So that's really great.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. And thanks to the participation we've had. I didn't mention the comments or the chat so far. It's kind of a bit late now, but thank you to Johnny CNC1 and people that participated. I see we have like 50 people or so that are watching this. So yeah. So hopefully you guys got something out of this. I'm endeavoring to do this once a week, every Monday at this time, to collaborate with other YouTubers. And Abby has been a staple of this for quite a while. So we will probably be back soon to do another one of these. In the meantime, if anyone has any suggestions for topics that where you could ask questions or we could get different perspectives on it, let us know in the chat. This is going out live on Abby's channel and on my channel, by the way, so you'll be able to see it there. Yep. And anything else, Abby, before we sign off?
So I think, having 50 people watching right now is pretty incredible. And if you have, like questions that you want answered during some of these live streams, whether you're primarily watching Bill's channel or my channel or both of them, hopefully, just let us know, because we're always open to hearing some of the struggles that you might be encountering and how we can, give you some advice on how to address some of those, or any questions that you have about your experiences with the job search and career overall process. Just let us know.
Yeah. And if you're watching this on my channel, check out Abby's channel. As I say, Abby is a recruiter, so she has a bit of a different perspective on things than me. So get your advice from a variety of different sources, like I always say. Mm-hmm. And if you are looking for like an interview coach, that kind of stuff, I do not provide that service myself, but Abby does. So check out her channel. And if that's something that you're looking for, go there and see what she has to offer, because I understand that's your main line, right?
Mm-hmm. It is. Awesome. Yep. Interview coaching. We do. My most popular type of session is called an interview strategy session. And it's where I sit down with people one-on-one, look at their resume, look at the job that they've applied to, whatever information they have about their upcoming, interview, how many people are there, what is it, virtual or is it in person, who is in it, etc. Those are always really beneficial, and it's a big confidence booster to it. If you just have a 45-minute session with me, most people feel significantly more prepared for their upcoming interview.
Yeah, so check that out. Oceana says, subject of ageism soon. Is that something you talk about on a regular basis? I think you've mentioned that a couple of times.
Yeah, every once in a while I'll put a video out on, bias, like age discrimination and things like that. And a lot of my clients that I work with are older individuals who are really struggling with finding a job. They might be able to get through to the first round of the interviews, but then I think there's some sort of bias that's occurring during the interview process. And so it's helping people, be able to really define how they are going to be a good fit for the role, even though they might be approaching retirement. And in the United States, it is illegal to discriminate against someone based off of their age. And so if you do feel like you're experiencing that, neither Bill nor I are lawyers, but there are resources out there for you to kind of take the next steps if you need to. In most cases, I don't think it needs to get to that stage. I think a lot of it has to do with how you present yourself in the interview process and follow up. And, there's lots of, layers to that onion. But that is a topic that I tend to discuss because I work with a lot of people who are frustrated and believe that could be playing a part.
Yeah, check out Abby's videos on that. I that's one of the topics I generally try and steer away from. So, I understand that Abby you've made a couple of videos on that over the years. So check those out. Okay. Thanks everybody. We're going to be back. I certainly will be right here in a week, and Abby will probably be joining me in the future. Details to follow. So thanks everyone. I wish you nothing but the best. Take care.
Thanks everyone.